Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Titus Awokuse, Michigan State University. I'm a member of the AAEA Mentoring Committee. I'd like to welcome all of you to this edition of the AAEA's Listening to the Diverse Voices session. We've had several of these in the past. And just to give a really brief intro for why we're doing this. As you all know, we have a large association with a wide range of members. And we tend to see each other like once a year or maybe twice a year for our annual meetings. And at those meetings, we don't get to spend as much time as we want to spend with most people. So we don't know as much about people's stories. And we feel like it's important to create space for members of the association to get to know some of our members a little bit better, know some of their stories and how they got to where they are now, their academic and professional stories. And today we have an opportunity to hear from three of our members. We have three excellent panelists today. But before I go into the introduction of our speakers, I first want to acknowledge the members of the AAEA mentoring committees. In addition to myself, we have on the committee Kelly McGuire, David Zilberman, Zoe Plaquias, Jeffrey Owen, Cesar Escalante, and Alicia Roseburg. And the committee is very appreciative of all the support and help that we've gotten from Jessica Wister. So each of the panelists will speak for a short few minutes. And after each one have given their brief presentations, then we will open the floor to the audience to ask questions or make some brief comments. And we'll give the panelists opportunity to respond to those questions or those comments. You could direct your question to a particular panelist, or you could direct your question to all the panelists so they can provide feedback. I'd like to begin with our first panelist. We're glad to have Sarah Lowe, who since August 2022 has been serving as the professor and head of the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She's very passionate about leading faculty from diverse research areas in pursuit of the land-grant mission. Previous to coming back to University of Illinois, she held the Fred Henko Chair in Agriculture within the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri. At Missouri, she was the inaugural director of the Rural and Farm Finance Policy Analysis Center. Prior to that, she led a turnaround of Extension's Regional Economic and Entrepreneurial Development (EXCEED) program. And before that, she began a career in academia. She was outside of academia for several years. She was part of the USDA's Economic Research Service in Washington, D.C. for 10 years and was a research associate at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. You hear that one more time. She grew up in rural Scotland and Iowa and holds a PhD in agricultural and consumer economics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And she also received an MS degree in agricultural economics from Purdue University and a bachelor's from Iowa State University. Our second panelist is Nate Kauffman. Nate Kauffman is the Vice President and Omaha Branch Executive with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and is the Kansas City Fed's principal expert on the agricultural economy. He leads several bank and Federal Reserve system efforts to track economic and financial conditions in the U.S. agriculture and holds the Kansas City Fed's Agricultural Symposium. In his role as the bank's lead economist and representative in the state of Nebraska, Nate provides strategic direction and oversight for the Omaha branch, regional research, and economic outreach throughout the state. He is responsible for briefing the Kansas City Fed's president, a member of the Federal Open Market Committee on Economic and Business Activity. Nate joined the Federal Reserve in 2012, and he received his PhD in economics from Iowa State University. Our third panelist is Grace Melo. Grace Melo is an assistant professor and the Accountability, Climate, Equity, and Scholarship Faculty Fellow in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Texas A&M University in College Station. Our main research interest is in explaining human behavior. She has published research on labeling, food demand, immigration, and education in economics and policy journals. Our current research focuses on food choice, nutrition, and health using national survey data and economic experiments. Prior to joining Texas A&M, she was an assistant professor in Chile, where she conducted research on food policy and education. During her free time, she enjoys dancing, running, and hiking. She received a doctoral degree in agricultural and applied economics from the University of Georgia. Thank you to each of our panelists for accepting our invitation. So we'll begin the presentation with our first panelist, Sarah Lowe.
Thank you, Titus. I just have one slide that I'm going to share. Do you guys all see that? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Yeah, so Titus gave an excellent introduction for me. He also mentioned I'm passionate about the land grant mission, research, teaching, and extension, and that's really what's driving me into my current position. I love my current position. My predecessor is on here too. I see that, so I'm excited to have him hear this. It's really exciting. Every day is something different. You never know what's going to happen. And it allows me to be collaborative and innovative and have a positive effect on students, faculty, and the world. So I was asked to kind of present on how did I get here? How did I become a department head? Why do I want to be a department head? I get asked that a lot. So I'll start with my undergrad degree is actually in public service and administration in agriculture. So I actually started in public administration and public management and pursued that before I think I'd even ever heard of agricultural economics. I knew I wanted to help people in rural areas. I've wanted to help people in rural areas since I was about 9 years old, particularly through policy. I was a policy wonk as a young child. So in my slide here, I put my Clifton strengths in the upper left-hand corner. So if you're not familiar with those, don't worry about it. But if you are familiar with them, it tells you a little bit about me. I'm very high on influencing and strategic thinking. And I think those really are helpful as a department head. I love helping people, but I'm strong in influencing, I'm strong in strategic thinking, strategic planning. And so I think my current job is a great use of my strengths as I continue to help people in rural areas through public policy. So a little bit about my childhood. I grew up, here's me and my sister riding our horses through the main street of our hometown in Kirkcowan, Scotland. It's in a remote rural area of Scotland. The village had about 150 people, 2 pubs and a post office. So that's the pub to people ratio in Scotland for you there. But I grew up in Southwest Scotland in a remote rural area. My father was a fisherman and our salmon fishery was really devastated by acid rain, by Chernobyl. And as a 9-year-old, I walked into one of the pubs and talked to our MP. So he's coming from London. I thought, this is my opportunity to tell him we need to help people in our rural community. And so that kind of got me bitten, I think, a little bit on the policy bug. So grew up in Scotland, moved to Iowa when I was in high school, where my grandparents lived, and went to high school in Iowa, got to do the 4-H and state fair and all the things that people do when they grow up in a rural area in Iowa. I already mentioned, did my undergrad at Iowa State. I was thinking after Iowa State to go to graduate school in rural sociology. And my advisor and his wife were both PhD rural sociologists. They said, you know, if you want to help rural communities, go into ag econ. So that was kind of how I ended up going to Purdue to work on my master's degree in agricultural economics. While I was at Purdue, I became familiar with the Center for the Study of Rural America, which at the time was a new center within the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. I decided I really wanted to work there. And so I ended up working there. So I went to the Kansas City Fed right after finishing my master's degree. I worked there for 2.5 years. And although I'd always had this policy bug, and I really got to exercise that in the Fed system, it was there that I really fell in love with research. And so I had never, ever thought about doing a PhD before going to the Kansas City Fed, but I fell in love with research there and thought this is an opportunity for me to help rural communities through policy and research. And so, of course, from there, I went to Illinois to get my PhD. I spent 10 years at USDA Economic Research Service. I did a lot of policy work. I had kind of a lower research portfolio. 2008 started there, and the end of the Bush administration, there was a lot less emphasis on journal article research, I think, at ERS at the time. And so I really got to do a lot of timely, impactful kind of policy work. Got started right away doing work on local foods when the Obama administration came in. Every time an administration changes, kind of the topics related to rural economic development, the policy tools for rural economic development change. And so that's kind of what makes rural economic development pretty fun, because things are always changing. But the biggest thing I learned at ERS was that to have impact, to improve people's lives, you needed to be timely when working with policymakers. And so I always tried to think a few years out, what are the issues that need to be in a journal in a couple years so we can answer questions that policymakers ask us. You know, a lot of the questions policymakers ask us, they give us 30 minutes to come up with an answer. And you're thinking, this is something that could take me about 18 months to do really well. So I found the trick was to anticipate a couple years ahead of time what policymakers were going to be asking you. Easier said than done. One of the last things I did in Washington, D.C. was a detail to Secretary Perdue's office, where I was part of the infrastructure team, and I helped develop the rural title of President Trump's infrastructure bill. This was great, got me lots of hands-on policy experience, was really fun, but kind of brings me to, you know, this is the mentoring committee, so brings me a little bit to, I think, the importance of mentoring. And one of the things that occurred when I was asked to go in this detail, so basically I got kind of 30 minutes notice, like, hey, go to the secretary's office, that's your new job now. But when I got there, I negotiated like, hey, I'm working on this journal article with Dawn Filmony, and she's coming to town in 2 months, and we're going to work for a week. So I was able to negotiate right up front with them, like, I need this week to work on my research. I think the mentoring I had at ERS was really great. David McGranahan, Mary Ahern were all great mentors to me. They and Dawn gave me advice to do kind of one journal article a year to stay in the game, to be able to stay in academia. And that was really good advice, because at the time, I mostly did policy work. There wasn't a lot of incentives to do journal articles at ERS. But, you know, doing that one journal article a year on average, that allowed me to stay in the game. And after about 10 years at ERS, I began to feel like I was losing touch with rural America and the people that I was trying to serve. We didn't have a lot of opportunities to travel outside the Beltway. And, you know, other than when I went home to see my grandma in Iowa, you know, it was hard for me to keep my finger on the pulse of rural America. So that got me thinking about leaving ERS. And I really wanted to go do extension. I had, you know, when I was growing up doing 4-H, you know, extension was a big part of my life. And I thought, I want to, you know, I've made my stamp on federal policy. I've had all these experiences with federal policy. I wondered, could I make a bigger difference in people's lives by working in extension? So that was when I went to Mizzou and did this turnaround with the Regional Economic and Entrepreneurial Development Extension Program at Mizzou. And so that got me kind of into management, right? There were 44 county community economic development specialists that I provided intellectual leadership for, and I had a staff, a few faculty on campus that gave me kind of that taste of management that kind of led to where I am now with the department head position. So there, I'll stop sharing because you guys can only look at snapshots of me so long. So I want to finish with just a few kind of mentoring pieces. I advise all of you out there, I love the mix of names here. We've got some really senior, amazing people, some fellows, we've got some really young people, we've got some of my former coworkers. So advice for younger and junior people, make and seize opportunities. So I see two ways to do this. And I've done both, I think, pretty well. Tell people what you want. You'll never get to where you want to go unless you tell people what you want so that they can help you. And then the other piece of that is, I think everything builds on everything else. So something that might seem kind of small and inconsequential might turn out to be a bigger thing or helps you get to the next slightly bigger step. And so an example of both is when I was 19, I interned for a US senator, one of the senators from Iowa. And I immediately went in there and said, I want to be the Secretary of Agriculture. And I think some people thought, who is this 19-year-old girl thinking she's going to be the Secretary of Agriculture someday? But, you know, it kind of showed that I was ambitious. I wanted to make a difference with policy. And, you know, that experience when I'm 19, like, that's inconsequential. It's not on my CV. But that experience helped me get the job at the Fed, right? And then the job at the Fed helped me get the job at ERS. And the job at ERS helped me get, you know, to where I am now. So just another example. I think, of telling people what you want and being entrepreneurial, because I do entrepreneurship extension.
Sorry to interrupt. You have about one more minute.
Okay,
yep.
I'll tell one more anecdote. I talked to a lot of grad students who kind of, oh, I don't want to TA, I don't want to do, you know, so I encourage grad students to be entrepreneurial. I'll give an example. When I went to Purdue, I was assigned to Kevin McNamara, and he had me doing some work on manufacturing. And I thought, this is kind of boring. I want to work in policy. So I told Kevin, hey, I want to work in policy. So he and I drove down to the state legislature. I said, hi, I'm this grad student at Purdue. I want to work with the state legislature. And they gave me a list of intractable problems that they couldn't solve or had been working on. And said, if you can figure out how to do one of these, we'll pay for your assistantship. And so that was what happened. I took one of these problems, I solved it. That became my master's thesis. And I got this great, you know, assistantship instead of, you know, teaching or doing research on a topic I wasn't interested in. My assistantship was doing policy and research on something I really cared about. So tell people what you want and recognize everything builds on everything else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. As a former department chair, I can relate to some of the great experiences that you're having right now. But one of the things that I've really learned from the previous sessions of diverse voices that we've had is the non-linear path that many of us follow to where we are now. I'm sure that your story will resonate with some people too, that they may not have planned to get a PhD, but somebody, some mentor, some experience got them to jump on that wagon and now see where you are influencing the rest of the profession. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nate Kauffman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Nate, please take the floor.
Well, thanks, Titus. Thanks for the invitation to join. It's good to hear others talk a little bit about their story, and I've had the chance to meet and interact with Sarah a number of different times, and always good to hear some additional stories there, and look forward to hearing Grace's as well. I'm glad too, Titus, that you motivated here my portion by recognizing that it can often be a nonlinear path to where we're at today. So glad to be able to share a little bit. I am, for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet, I am an economist and serve as the branch executive in our Omaha office of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So I have a couple different main responsibilities that I'm involved in for people that aren't familiar with the Fed. It is the central bank for the United States, and the way that monetary policy happens is to provide input from all over the country. So I'm responsible for providing input from the state of Nebraska. And because our region that we cover here is so highly agricultural, and my background being in ag economics, I'm providing input there too. So I mentioned I've had a pretty nonlinear path to where I am today. I have actually an undergraduate degree in chemistry, which does not sound like a logical path to economics. So I'll try to offer a little bit more there. I finished with a degree in chemistry from a small school in Canton, Ohio. Worked for a few years broadly with that as an area of focus. But then ultimately decided to spend some time living and working overseas. This was in my early 20s. My wife and I decided to take on a voluntary service position in Southeast Europe. So we lived in Bosnia for 3 years, working on projects that were broadly you could think of them as grassroots economic development with a focus on agriculture. It was ultimately that experience in Bosnia then that sparked my interest in economics. So I had taken some classes, learned a little bit about doing some math and some other things to enroll at Iowa State. I would not have been ready for a PhD program at that time, so I started in a master's program. Did 1 year in the master's program and then went on through a PhD there. So I've been with the Fed now a little more than 10 years, and a lot of my work now, it started as being more of a primary contributor on things related to regional economics and agriculture, but I'm shifted more over time to being more of a leadership role on those things that we have some initiatives on. So the email invitation here asked to share a couple of things that maybe shaped my path to my career, and I'm going to try to be pretty brief and look forward to what questions people might have. Those of you that know me well or have had a chance to interact with would know that experience that I had in Bosnia was actually, and I've said this before in different places, was a life-changing experience. I think that it's hard to spend that amount of time, was there for 3 years, without having it really change the way you see the world when you're living alongside and acclimating to a different culture, communicating in a different language and one that I hadn't known before, and experiencing really the world in a differently at a young age. As I mentioned, it was a humanitarian organization. We're working with former refugees. So there's two things that I'll highlight that I think really shaped my path where I am today from that experience. The first is embracing what I would say are uncomfortable situations and ultimately experiencing gain from them. In my current role, I am responsible for our board of directors here in Omaha, and the first board meeting that I ever attended was in fact one that I was responsible for. So it was diving right in. It was a pretty uncomfortable situation at the start. I learned a lot of it was trial by fire. A couple of years into my time here at the Fed, I was asked to do a congressional testimony, and I did not have a lot of experience at that time. I will say that was pretty unnerving, and going into it was pretty uncomfortable. I learned a lot from there also. You also notice here that I'm not using slides, and I do a lot of presentations, but most of my presentations these days are without slides, and that was also uncomfortable at first, but I actually prefer it now, and I think it's an easier way for me to communicate. And then the last thing I'll share here on embracing uncomfortable situations is actually more personal. I have an unhealthy fear of sharks. It's just something, it is what it is. But my oldest son decided that he wanted to learn how to scuba dive, and we got our scuba certification, and actually just a couple of weeks ago had the chance to go scuba diving. We did encounter a shark. So it was something that I've learned to embrace uncomfortable situations. The second thing then from that experience in Bosnia is really just increased exposure and awareness to different perspectives. And that's been a skill that I think has been helpful in the time that I've been with the Fed, where we still do a lot of our own research and we have economists on staff that are doing the research, but a big part of my job is actually just trying to think of good questions to ask people in business and learn more about what's happening so that we can better relay some of that information. I'll end here just with a couple comments. There's always people along the way that help shape the path. I saw Alicia Rosberg online, and she was a former grad student and friend at Iowa State. And, we often would talk about biofuels or problems with MATLAB or things like that. Family and friends along the way, obviously, and other faculty and fellow students. The AAEA annual meeting, even now, I don't publish a lot of academic work, but it is a conference that I try to attend every year. in part because I get to interact with a lot of other smart people and meet new people there. So that's just a kind of a quick description of where I've gotten today. Again, I've enjoyed the time at the Fed. It's not an academic position, but I still do remain tied to the ag econ world and appreciate the chance to share a few thoughts about my career and look forward to the questions. Thanks, Titus.
Thank you very much, Nate. I mean, talking about nonlinear path, I remember the first time that I met Nate. We met on the playgrounds at Iowa State University. I was on sabbatical there, and his kid and my kids were playing together, and I got to know that he's also actually in the department where I was doing my sabbatical that year. We've come a long way since then, but thank you for sharing about your path to where you are now, and also giving us some diversity of experiences in terms of what we can do after getting our PhDs and still contributing to generating knowledge and influencing policy and helping to transform society. So thank you very much on that. Our next speaker is Grace Melo. I've already introduced her earlier. I think she also brings a very interesting perspective in terms of our own journey. Grace?
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. So I'm different to Nate. I do have slides because I still don't know how to improvise. So I hope everyone can see it.
Grace, can I pause you for a second? We're seeing
Yes.
your presenter view. This is Zoe. I apologize. We're
Okay,
seeing your presenter view. If you can switch the screen.
Let me see if I learn how to do this. Let me just remove the other. Okay, now it should work. It's amazing how I'm still learning how to do Zoom after I was teaching for 2 years, just remotely. Okay, let me try it again.
Yep, there we go. Just hit full screen and we'll be good.
Okay, no, it's not working. I just shared a piece of my screen.
Okay.
Because it's working.
Okay, this is good.
Screen. It's okay. I hope it will work. Okay, so I call this my unplanned journey because as I'm gonna share, I didn't plan it to be here and just sharing this journey. So I'm gonna start with where I come from. So I am from Ecuador. I come from a middle income class family. So I was really eager to explore the world when I was in high school, and I decided to go anywhere. I was really open to study abroad. My family was supportive, and the only university that I thought I was a good chance for me, given that I didn't know English and I still struggle with my I guess the way that I speak and my accent, the best choice for me was Zamorano University, and that is in Honduras. This university is quite interesting. It's where you get to see or meet the students from all over in Latin America, but everything is focused on agriculture and farming. So I didn't, to be honest, I didn't really like agriculture. My family enjoyed gardening and all of that, but I was never involved. But I was ready to leave home. I am like an outlier in Latin America. We usually live with our parents. This was really critical for me because that opened the door to do an exchange program. So the first university that I went was Purdue University. And my first research job, if I want to say it, was in a microbiology lab. Then later on, because of the university where I was from, I was recruited by the head department, Octavio Ramirez, to come to the University of Georgia and do an exchange program. So it took me like about a year. However, I knew that I didn't have work experience, so I decided to go back to Ecuador. And in that period, I was working in product development, and it just lasted a month. I realized that that was not for me. I was not ready to work in a plant for like from 8 to 5. And so that confirmed my desire to go to grad school. So the university that opened the door for me, it was University of Georgia. That was the only school that I applied, and it was because I have the connection while I was doing the exchange program. I really enjoy traveling. So I saw this opportunity to do this study abroad in China. For the class, it was required to do a term paper. And I remember that by then I was working on immigration policy. So I was really curious about the internal migration in China. So that became my first AAEA presentation. And since then I haven't stopped going to the meeting and meeting great people. And in some of those meetings, I meet Kelly, that I saw that she's here, and also Noé. And I have met really great collaborators in the meeting. So I got, after 6 years, I got my PhD degree. I became the first generation doctorate student in my family. I did enjoy and learn how to do scuba diving. I just add this point to the presentation because what Nate told us just now. Okay, so after 6 years, I was in the job market, and by the time that I was in the job market, a postdoc opportunity was not really common in our area, so that was never, I never considered that. And I was lucky to find this job, academic job, which was the thing that I wanted in food policy. So I moved to Chile. I was really open. Since I graduated from high school, I was really open to go anywhere. Whenever the doors open, I was just there, ready to cross the doors. So I moved to Chile. That was a huge change, going from a small town in Athens, Georgia, to Santiago, the capital city of Chile. During those periods, I learned how to do trekking. Even though I was from Ecuador, I was not really involved in trekking. I just fell in love with the mountains in Chile. In my third year, we had the pandemic period, and I was really tough because I was alone. And Chile has these really strong COVID restrictions. So I decided for my mental health to go back to Ecuador and stay with my family. I was lucky to have my mentor and my boss, the department head back then, to allow me to stay in Ecuador and teach remotely. So I was doing all of my classes and research from home. While I was there in Ecuador, I was considering just trying to see where I want to be, and I realized that I wanted to go back to the US. So I started like applying for jobs, got some interviews, but finally the university that opened the door for me was Texas A&M. And after online interview, because everything was the pandemic period, I was in Ecuador, which I did it in a really strange situation. I was doing some trekking in Ecuador in the rainforest, and I broke my wrist, and I could have canceled the interview, but I prepared, it was my right hand, and I remember the struggles just preparing for the interview, and I was doing the interview with the cast and with the pain and everything, but everything went good. So I moved to Texas A&M, and it's been a year and a few months, and now I found a new passion, which is country dancing. So just reflecting on what I just told you, I feel I'm just gonna steal a quote from a writer, Lewis Carroll, that if you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. I didn't have a structured plan that will take me somewhere. I was just open and like paying attention where the door is gonna open and ready to cross. Just reflecting on the critical stages from my life, I find that the first step that I took was that leaving home and going to another university in Honduras was really critical, because there I met my now co-authors. Luis Peña Lébano is a great friend, a co-author. And also some of my mentors, they are also from that university, like Kauffman and other colleagues that I have at Texas A&M. I would say that my first academic job was tough. I learned really things that I never learned in grad school. And I also learned an important lesson. I was not only geographically isolated because Chile is down south, which was not really productive in my first years. But I realized the importance of working with others. So that to me now is a priority. I think the other stage that was really critical was that I came to Texas A&M through a program that brings diversity to the university. So that is Accountability, Climate Equity, and Scholarship program. And that was just a door for me to move back. And I know that many universities are implementing the program. And through all of the stages in different universities, I have had really good mentors. And even in the institutions I am not working on through AAEA, I have met really great people. Working with friends and students, especially students from Chile, it has been a great experience. So I just want to share something that Marco shared with me. This is his philosophy, but I think it applies to my life and it can apply to anyone. I feel that working hard is really important. Having a goal, which is dreaming big and helping others. So I try to apply that to my life. And finally, I think everyone that is here have learned that the academic journey can be fun. I love generating ideas, engaging conversations with the scholars. However, I learned that it can also be really tough. We face paper rejections. Just this week, I got an email from a co-author that the paper is not going to be considered, and I don't know if we are ready to abandon the paper because it's been rejected from several journals. But so we face some challenges. I think what has helped me during those challenging moments is that I have a life outside academia. My family that is really supportive. I have some hobbies that I try to keep for my mental health. And also knowing that I am pursuing my passions. Something that Rudy, now the department head at Texas A&M, shared with me is that Grace, the most important thing that you should care is that you enjoy what you are doing. And I try also to incorporate that into my life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. Really appreciate that. You heard from 3 panelists from a diverse group of experiences. And as I'm looking at the screen to see who is participating, I can also see quite a range of background and experiences and professional, where people are placed professionally right now. I see some graduate students, I see some junior faculty, some mid-career, and some senior faculty members. And one of the things that I want to get us to think about is the process of getting into this profession and succeeding within the profession. But before I ask the first question, I would like to encourage any of you that may have questions to place them in the chat, and we'll go through as many as we can. While you're doing that, I'm going to ask the first question. One of the things that I've heard of, and I experienced this myself too, is that as a graduate student, transitioning from being a graduate student to faculty, especially applying and searching for that first job, is usually quite challenging. So if you can share a little bit about your experience navigating the transition from being a student to your first job. Or an alternative question is, in Sarah's case, she was at ERS and then she worked at Missouri, and now she has an administrative leadership role in a new university at Illinois. You can reflect a little bit on the transition and the process of making the decision about moving from one job to another, maybe from one institution to another university to the other university, or from industry to to academia or vice versa. Any of you can start.
Thanks, Titus. I'll start, as Titus mentioned, maybe I'll talk about it from the ERS to academia lens. I actually found the transition to be relatively easy. Granted, I came in with tenure. I think that was a big help. But they're very similar environments, particularly because I had a 50% extension appointment. My policy work essentially became extension. So as opposed to being on the phone with staffers, I'm on the phone with farmers. So I don't know, part of it is my personality too. But I found that the transition from ERS to academia was maybe easier than I would have thought. I think too at ERS, at least in the generation I was at ERS, we had a lot of people come for 2 or 3 years, treat it a little bit like a postdoc and then go into academia. So it was easy. And, I try to have the philosophy that it's better to work with someone for a short period of time than to have never worked with someone and never gotten to know someone. So that's my piece. What do you think, Grace? You talked a little bit about this, in your talk.
I always was in academia, just that the requirements were a little bit different. I think I was invested too much in meeting the requirements of my university, which was about the same research, but there was like a specific funding that you need to get, like it's equivalent to NSF. And the funny story is when I came here and was ready to quit, I got the funding, but I couldn't use it. So I will say that wherever people are going, they should meet the standards or where they want to be instead of where they are. I guess if you are going to be in academia, you should meet the standards of academia instead of like trying to meet people's expectations in your own institution, because I was meeting the department head expectations.
Very good, thank you. Nate?
Yeah, I'll just say, so my transition when I left Iowa State with my graduate degree and was looking for jobs, I was on the fence about exploring either academia or something else. And it happened to be that there was a position that came open with the Kansas City Fed, and it turned out to be a pretty good fit. When I actually made the move, so my transition was my youngest of 4 was born the day that I graduated from Iowa State. He was 3 weeks old when we moved. And we moved to Omaha from Ames when he was 3 weeks and closed down the house the previous day, started work the next day. It was a pretty quick transition. And so I think a lot of things that maybe new faculty, or if you're new in a career, are dealing with is just that work-life balance. It looks different in grad school, and then getting to a place that feels sustainable maybe takes a little bit of time. I learned, I think that it helped to try to work much further in advance than what I might normally have been inclined to do when I was in grad school. And that was helpful. I also learned, early on that knowing my audience helped a lot. There were times where I needed to engage in a technical conversation, and then there were other times where it was really just life experiences and other things that helped maybe more inform the nature of the discussion. So that would be, it is different for me because I'm not in an academic job now in terms of the transition, but just a couple thoughts there.
That's very good, thank you. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see too many questions, so I'm encouraging you to put some questions there. While you're doing, okay. While you're doing that, I may ask another question. If you don't put questions in there, I'll be asking questions, and mine may not be the best questions either. So the mentoring committee really cares about helping to facilitate an environment where we provide some mentorship and also encourage other people to do that in a way that is beneficial to members of the association. I guess the question that I want to ask you all on the panel is whether you can share briefly an experience you had with a mentor that really affected the trajectory of your career. And also, maybe you can also add or focus on the how of a good mentoring relationship, how you enter into one, or how you mentor other people in a way that really makes a difference for them. Because I know that people usually think they should approach someone to mentor them. I mean, who should initiate mentorship, and how do you manage up or manage down, either as a mentor or a mentee? So talk briefly about your experience as a mentor or with mentors in general.
I'll address maybe the how, because I get asked that question a lot. I have younger scholars ask me, how do you have such amazing mentors? And I don't know. No, I'm kidding. What I'm going to share, what I wanted to share is I do think it helps if there's some kind of connection. So people who know me know I'm really passionate about helping people in rural areas. And so that's a connection. So if you're a junior person and you're really passionate about helping people in rural areas, I will always have arms wide open for you because I share the same passion. So there's that kind of connection. And I think that's a really good entry point. So think about you as a PhD student, as a junior scholar, you're looking for more mentors within AAEA. Who's doing the work that you find really exciting, and try and make connections with those people.
Very good.
I can talk from the perspective of being a mentee. I learned that we usually have different areas that we need help, and just having one person to rely on is not gonna be easy for the person and not easy for you because people have time constraints. So I learned that you have to have a mentor for different areas. So if I can share how many mentors I have right now, I would say at least 4 that I can rely on, some from my institution and some from others in academia. But also I have mentors for other areas like spiritual related things. So I think it's how it works for me, but also I have heard that it's just advisable to have, if you have X number of questions that you need to address, it's recommendable to have more than one people to help you with those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say really briefly, one of my responsibilities is to work with a board of directors here. And so I benefit actually a tremendous amount from interacting with that board. These are executives for the most part, people who have far more experience than I do and a lot more leadership and years in their roles than what I do. And so it's always helpful to interact with them. I also, though, serve as a mentor. We have within our organization a program that allows us to connect with mentees. And I guess if I was making a connection between both of those things, I would say that trying to ask good questions and open-ended questions is really the most successful form for trying to engage in that conversation. It tends to draw out things that might not otherwise. So whether you're a mentee, I would say, ask open-ended questions of people around you. It gives you a chance to learn a lot. But same thing for mentors. I think it's giving space for people to think about a response to an open-ended question and can learn a lot that way too.
That's very good. Thank you for your contributions there. One of the biggest challenges of our profession, whether you are in academia ultimately or in industry, is that because we work in the knowledge industry and we have flexibilities on how many balls we can be juggling at the same time, we tend to juggle a lot of balls simultaneously, and that tends to create a lot of tension and pressure and emotional stress. And I think that fits into the question that we just got from Anthony Fulbani here, and I'll read it. How do you deal with pressures from your job? In other words, how do you handle the demands and expectations?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, particularly as a department head, this is my job, is to handle pressures and lots of expectations, and Titus knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't always practice what I preach, but try to not take things personally. Like I try to not, when I go to bed at night, I don't sit and worry about, something. I just try to go to sleep. So, try to take things personally, and then don't take things personally. This is a job. And Grace mentioned hobby and spirituality. So I have a dog training hobby, And so that's kind of my way to unplug is I have 2 dogs. So I go home, do some dog training, can kind of, release some of that, some of that pressure. And I do think it's healthy, and I think it's good in terms of role models too, whether I'm modeling to my child that it's good to have a hobby, or whether I'm modeling to, faculty in my department or mentees. It's good to have something that you enjoy that's a little bit separate. I know for me, the dog show life gives me, nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows what I do. I can go to a obedience trial on the weekend and nobody talks anything academia, and it helps.
On top of the activities that I try to do for many different benefits, I learned that I cannot compare myself to others or my journey to others, because that really, on top of the expectations and demands that we have, it just put a lot of things on my shoulders. So I try to not do that. I know that I have to, it's good to have role models, but when I start to comparing to my peers, so I think everyone has their own skills and strengths. And I love what Sarah shared about identifying our strengths. And I heard that we should do that exercise. It's something I haven't started yet. I think that helps. And what really always emphasize is enjoy what you're doing, because otherwise, what is the point?
Yeah, I would say for me, being clear about what my priorities are is probably the main thing. I had a different approach when I was in grad school at Iowa State. I was probably older than most other grad students. I got started a little bit later. I already had kids, and as I was going through the program, I treated my graduate studies there very much like a full-time job. I started whatever time in the morning and quit at whatever time in the evening, and I didn't do a lot of work in the evening hours. I've kind of applied, I think, the same philosophy to my job now. I try to make sure I know what the priorities are. People know that I have to get in a run every now and then. And if it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and there's work, I'm going to go for a run. It helps me clear my head. So I think just keeping clear what my priorities are, and maybe not think that everything is necessarily the same weight as an expectation, but try to make sure that I have in my mind what I know the main priorities are.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think we're close to the top of the hour right now. I see one other question here. I'll read it out there. I don't think we'll have time to go around the panel for it, but maybe one person can speak quickly to it. Aside from having mentors, do you have any other tips for graduate students transitioning into an assistant professor role? That's a question from Gloria Awokuse. Who wants to take that? We can take one feedback on that. I'm thinking
I can be short. Meeting people. I think meeting people is important, not only to do that, but for many goals that you're gonna achieve. Knowing people in the association, especially if you're looking for an academic job here in the US, that people will remember your name. That's really helpful. Sarah, maybe, or Nate.
It's a good one, Grace. See and be seen. Go to the meetings.
See and be
Go to
seen.
all the sessions.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. I mean, I started out by saying that our professional paths are non-linear, and I mean that in a very broad context. I would say that one thing that I've learned is that you can't plan everything with your future. You have to allow for the randomness to lead you to some great places. And those randomness happen when we take the opportunities that present themselves to us to meet other people and interact with them. Our meetings are part of that, contacting people directly and getting to know people in your home department as a graduate student is a big part of that. That don't just know professors that taught your classes. Go knock on doors. It's your opportunity to meet some of the best people in the profession in your own department. Most of them would not say no to you. They actually welcome that. I think this has been a great session, and I just want to take the opportunity once again to thank each of our panelists, and also thank you all for participating online. I'd like to point you in the direction of the previous sessions that we've had that are available online that you can check out. And this is also recorded, so you can see it online too. And we will be having future events that are sponsored by the mentoring committee. So be on the lookout for announcement for pre-workshop potentially at the AAEA. We tend to have that every other year. And we also have diverse voices sessions as a series. And we have another one soon. So please be supportive of our efforts in promoting mentorship in the association. Once again, thank you to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.